Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingsheim with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're very happy to have join us as our guest, Lori Chmura. Lori is the Chief Executive Officer at Nyra Medical, a medical device company, and she has served as an executive in large companies such as Medtronic, Covidien, and Johnson & Johnson, and she's been involved in growing businesses in the United States and globally. Looking forward to her insights as she shares about lessons that she's learned as a leader. Looking forward to today's conversation with Lori.
It's great to have Lori joining us for our conversation. Appreciate you taking time out of your week to talk with us.
Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Well, tell me a little bit. I always love to hear people's career story and a little bit of their history. Can you give us just a quick overview of your career and just a flyover version of how you've gotten to where you are today?
Sure. When I think about my career, I think the best way to describe it is really in three segments. And so the first segment, I was a critical care registered nurse, worked in an open heart ICU as well as an ER. And that was a really great opportunity and certainly established a lot of the baseline of what I've kind of taken to grow my career through leadership. And then the second part of my career, the second segment, I would say, is in large Fortune 500 companies. So had roles of escalating leadership and in large, as I said, strategic Fortune 500 companies. And then from there, the last segment has been in the startup world. So venture capital backed kind of companies, small startup in various stages.
Great. So if you were able to go back and talk to a 22-year-old Lori and give her some advice, knowing what you've learned in your career, what advice would you give her?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And I've thought about that a lot. And there's a component of me that says, gosh, you should never go back and change anything, because anything that you change really changes the trajectory of your life. And then maybe the good things wouldn't happen. However, saying that, I think that from a maturity perspective in business, I think what I would have said, first of all, is just, network, and how important the network is. And what I mean by that is not just about who do you meet and who do you know, but really building relationships where you're working with and through people for results, as opposed to being kind of trying to be the smartest person in the room. And I think that, going back and reflecting upon my career, sometimes I think, gosh, did I have wonderful mentors and bosses who tolerated me? Because I'm not sure how they did. But had I really thought about it more, I think I would have realized that my competencies probably would have shined brighter had I learned the power of the network and the peer group and working, again, like I said, with and through others, as opposed to the person that always had to be, smartest, top, like knows all the answers, did all the research.
Sure. Well, talk about, you mentioned mentors, people that you probably helped you along as far as in your career and develop. Talk a little bit of the importance of that. And do you still have mentors or people that you use as sounding boards today that?
Yeah, absolutely. And, oftentimes I'll say, be careful about being over-mentored. And there's, I think, a lot of data specifically for women in leadership where, women seek very formal mentor relationships and they end up getting kind of mentored to death without ever really having a sponsor or someone that can kind of help them evolve. So I think that I've taken a little bit of a different approach in which I've had a lot of informal mentors in my career, as opposed to these kind of formal mentoring relationships where I observe, I'm a big observer, and I observe different leaders and different people, and I see how they behave in certain circumstances or how they make decisions or how they think. And then I'll just kind of tap them and say, hey, can you explain to me, like, you said this in this meeting, like, why did you say it like that? Or what were you thinking about when you said that? And that has really helped a lot in my development as a leader. I'm just looking for behaviors that I think are either attractive in others or I see them as being really effective, and then reaching out reaching out to those people. I've had some also amazing managers or bosses or leaders in my career who, early on kind of identified, wow, she's kind of like a diamond in the rough. If I can just kind of help her, and I've been incredibly fortunate with them. And I have two funny examples. My very first manager ever was a gentleman by the name of Ron Anson. I was a new sales rep in a med tech company. And one day kind of sat down with me and he said, Lori, if you're going to take a hill, I'm going to be right there with you because you're going to get it. You're going to win it. The problem is you can't take every hill. And he's like, you need to learn to pick and choose. And to this day, I realize that you have to prioritize. You have to understand where you're going to invest all of your energy to make something happen, specifically at the CEO level where you have an entire team of people that are getting things done. And because I have that take the hill at any cost mentality, I could potentially run over somebody. So I always have to be really thoughtful about saying, okay, I don't need to take that hill. Let's just see how this one plays out. And then, the second one, who I think gave me some really good advice was a man by the name of Bob Cathcart. And he was also in Datascope. And he just was the one that always, if I sent an email and decided that I was going to grandstand something to the entire company because it was a hill I was going to die on, or it was an issue that I felt strongly about, he would just very calmly and quietly call me and say, so, that was some email. I think you really made your point. And I'm like, what, you didn't think I was right? He's like, oh, it has nothing to do with it. But I don't think the president of the company needed to hear that, especially when you literally dogged their entire leadership team. I was like, oh, I did that? I did that, and I just had no idea, but I really appreciated kind of that fraternal correction that helped me to see things through a different lens because I was so principled and so driven. And again, because I had this start as a nurse, as a critical care registered nurse, you're constantly looking for ways to do things because you're going to save somebody's life. And so you'll do anything, that it takes to do that. And you'll be principled and you'll demand things. But when you move into the business world, again, back to what I would tell my 22-year-old self, the power of working with and through others and really using influence management probably would have been more effective.
So the flip side of that question is any advice you received early on in your career that you, looking back on, you should have ignored?
Should have ignored?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I don't know. I feel like every piece of advice I got me something or somewhere. But no, I don't really think anyone ever said something that I was like, gosh, I wish I didn't do that. I think everything helped me. I might not have done, I guess I'm being a little vague, but I might not have done exactly what the advice was, but I always felt like the truth is always somewhere in the middle. So somebody says something to you, and then you go, I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but there's an element of truth in there that I could take. And on that, it's not exactly the question, but we were going through a change in the organization, and I had been hired by one set of leadership, and then another set of leadership kind of came in, and we merged with another company and took over. And so I was the only one left standing that was kind of part of this new leadership team from the old guard. And so I didn't fit. It was very male dominated. It was very different. And I truly did not fit. And I was getting feedback from my manager at the time that, I was too loud. I was too aggressive. And as I said, probably there was some truth to it, but the truth was somewhere in the middle. And I sat down with the head of HR and she said to me, she said, Lori, feedback is a gift, right? We should always think about that as a gift, but not every ounce of feedback is you get to decide whether or not you want to take it. But recognize this, in this organization, if you decide not to embrace that feedback, you're limiting your career because that feedback is what this leadership team expects of their leaders in order to move on. So again, it's your choice and you get to decide what to do with that. And you can decide that that is not valuable to you, but then you also have to recognize how that's going to impact you moving forward. And it was really kind of a great, because for me, I thought, well, I don't fit. So if I don't fit, and I'm not going to advance and I have very specific goals, then maybe I need to leave. And I did leave that organization. So I guess it kind of answers your question.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, that there are some organizations that you're in, and I don't know if I've ever asked this question, but how do you decide? Again, you had to face that this is not a fit. I'm not going to go where I want to go, or there's not the opportunity.
Yeah.
What are some things that you would say to somebody coming in, maybe as a new leader, and go, they get into it and they go, this is not the right place for me?
Yeah, I think for me in that particular situation, it was kind of, it's hard to hear that you're not doing a good job all the time. We all want to. Human nature, you want to feel valued, you want to feel loved, you want to feel a part of something, And so the day-to-day just being stressed and realizing, gosh, if I talk in this meeting, someone's going to have a problem with it. Someone's going to roll their eyes. I'm not going to get what I want, out of it. And I think in this particular situation, I saw that in a meeting, if I was speaking, nobody was really listening. And then when I would propose something, nobody would really kind of embrace it, or, my team would, my direct reports would, of course, but certainly not the peer group, which is an important element of it. But then what ended up happening is we did a TLR, the talent leadership review, every quarter. And your manager was supposed to tell you what you ranked. And it was basically a 9 box, 3, 6, 9 box system. And so I had always been in the upper right and in the organization. And when it shifted, I asked my manager, I said, so you guys did TLR, am I still in the upper right? And, how are we thinking about next steps? And he looked at me and he said, no, you're in the middle box. And I knew in our organization, being in the middle box meant you weren't going anywhere. And I had such clear and crisp expectations for where my career was going to go that I knew that was a sign. So I would tell someone else, think about that. Are you able to either, number one, get what you want out of your career? Number two, influence the business in a way that essentially represents your constituents. So if you're the head of sales or the head of marketing or a general manager, are you effective enough within your peer group and to your manager that you can make a difference for your team? And if those things aren't happening, then you're probably not a fit, and your career is just, not only is your career not going to go anywhere, you become so ineffective that you've literally, that kind of plays out on everybody that's responsible to you or that you're responsible for.
So thinking back to that first leadership position that you were actually called upon to lead a team, what do you wish you would have known earlier about leadership? And, what are some things that would have helped you get off the ground quicker?
Yeah, that you can't do it for the person, right? So just because I think a lot of times new leaders think, okay, I just want to hire a team of people that yes me, because I can just fill in the gap there. And one of the things that I learned is that you have to be able to articulate very clearly what you expect and what it takes to win a situation or to do whatever you're asking them to do, because you can't actually do it for them. And so I think that was a big thing for me, was really understanding when I was hiring people to lead, like I needed them to lead, not just be kind of an extension of me. And I think I definitely made a mistake with that. I think the second thing is hire slow, fire fast, make sure that you're taking the time and you're investing. Specifically, my first role as a leader was, besides nursing, which was very different, but in the business world, was a sales manager. And, I needed to make, salespeople can talk you into anything. That's why they're good salespeople, right? And so I would meet somebody after the first time and say, okay, let's hire them. And then I could tell you stories upon stories about how that played out, right? And so then it was like, take your time, understand, what are you hiring for? What's the fit you're looking for? And put them through that 3 to 5, engagement interview process so that you truly get to see it. Because in the end, fit is first. Competencies is right there, and then motivation is right up there. And when you're hiring a leader, you need those 3 things.
So thinking back to the best hire that you made, did you know it going in that this was going to be your best hire? Or what is, you mentioned about kind of the 3 areas of fit. And then tell me your worst worst story about
Yes.
without names,
So-
of course, but
Right. So the best hire I ever made, I will say her name. And I've made some great hires, so I'm certainly not, undermining any of the others. But this woman by the name of Lisa Gilday, and I hired her as a sales rep, and she subsequently became, the vice president of multi-billion-dollar business at Medtronic. So just amazing hire. But I think the reason she was the best hire was because had a really good HR business partner mentor. And he really sat with me and talked about how we were going to do this process. We put her through a process, and she was one of the most intriguing people I had ever met because she was a salesperson, but she was wildly prepared for the interview. She was not chatty Cathy. She was super buttoned up. She did not disclose, I think she worked for me for a year before I knew she was married and had children. She just was so, focused. And she was probably one of the most coachable people I ever met, in that she just understood how to engage, not only with me as her manager, but with the team. And you can give her feedback every single step of the way. And so within, I would say, a couple of months, I realized, wow, she's great. And, I would sit with her in coaching sessions, and I always believed that she could do more than she believed she can do. And to me, that was one of the most gratifying things, was to open someone's eyes to the possibilities of that they can do more, and then show them the path and get them there. And as I said, she just shined throughout her career. So that was the best. And the worst was someone that, and I say this all the time, and I'm mad at myself. It was somebody that a bunch of other people told me I needed to hire. She's so great. She's so great. She's so great. You have to hire her. She's so great. She's so great. And so I literally had lunch with her, and I hired her. And it was like, wow, it was an immediate, I had no idea, and the fit wasn't there. There was such a clash from a culture perspective. I have a very big personality, and I tell people, I have a big personality, but I will be your biggest fan and your biggest supporter. But I have a big personality, and it doesn't work with everyone, and that's okay. And I didn't have any of those conversations. And it was just, and this person, I felt bad because I feel like I made their life miserable without even realizing it. You know what I mean? But I got to feel it, and it was just, and it ended in a shouting match, and I was like, okay, this is not good. This isn't good for any of us. But again, what I would say is I didn't follow my process. I used the recommendations of others. I was in a rush to get somebody in the role, so I was like, oh, we're better just to have somebody than to have nobody. And I really didn't do the assessment on that fit to make sure that she could be successful. And that was what I really did not focus on. And she couldn't be successful in our environment. She probably is wildly successful somewhere else, but not here in this environment. And I think that's the thing. When it ends, I always like to try to reiterate, and I don't think I do as good of a job as I can, but just hey, this didn't work out, but it's, kind of, it's not you, it's me kind of thing, and that's okay.
Yeah. So one of the things we've got people that are first-time CEOs that are listening to this, and I think one of the struggles that CEOs have that's a new experience for them is working with a board.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit of just what you've learned about the best way to work with a board, and just some of the things that someone should avoid or lean into that would be helpful in working with a board. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and hopefully this will come across right, because I've often thought of what are the appropriate ways to describe it. But I think oftentimes new CEOs forget that their board is kind of not an extension of their company or a friend of theirs. They have a fiduciary responsibility to control the company. And in many cases, specifically in the startup world, they're also the investor. So you have this kind of, almost like a healthy tension between the two roles, for lack of a better word, or some perverse incentives. And so I think I did this early on as well. And in some of the CEOs I've coached, I see them doing this, where they feel like they can call and vent to the board. They feel like they can tell the board every single thing that's going on. And what they don't realize is that in those moments when they're potentially venting and they haven't thought through something, the person on the other side is going to take that, and that nugget kind of stays in their head, and, oh, well, this was a problem and this was a problem. And all of us as CEOs are going to have what I call foot faults, right? We're all going to make some great decisions and we're going to make some really poor decisions. But you want to kind of maintain that trust and credibility with the board where you have the appropriate amount of transparency and the professionalism, and you keep to the forefront what the ultimate goal is, which is value creation, because it's about money. And so if you think through all that, you can still have a friendly relationship, and you can still, talk about your families and things that you have common ground on, but your focus should always be on, what stuff are you sharing that's value creating for the board? What issues are you sharing that you're being fully transparent on, but that you also have solutions for, so that you show that you kind of have control over it. And when you don't have control over it, how do you kind of position it in a way that doesn't look like you're kind of whining or giving up? You're saying, I'm faced with this challenge. You have expertise on this. Can you help me walk through this? And I think it's that has really helped me a lot over the years to kind of grow in my relationship with the board and really understand where they support, where they help, and then making sure that as much as I possibly can, I'm fully transparent with everything that I'm dealing with, but a way that continues to build trust and credibility, because I want them to stay with the company. I want them to continue to invest in the company. And I want them to believe that irrespective of how challenging it becomes, they can count on me and the team to navigate it. Maybe a little bumpy along the way, but they know we're going to get there.
Yeah, great advice. With all the changes happening rapidly, and with technology and AI and all that, any thoughts around that, how that is going to impact as a leader thinking through that?
It's interesting. Funny enough, I recently completed my MBA at Duke, and we had, a lot of sessions on AI and how does AI come into the business world. And I think the areas that, for me at least, as I looked at it, I think there's so many opportunities with AI in business that can enhance our business, can enhance our productivity. I mean, those are all, I think, obvious, right? And specifically in medtech, helping to diagnose something where you don't have you don't have all the information, but you have AI. But I think where the challenges are going to become in AI is the human factor and the humanity. Because I think, just like with the kind of evolution of all the technological changes that we've had with the younger generation kind of living on phones now and texting and stuff, I think, having the human factor to be able to, number one, discern when AI is real or whether it's fake, to understand, like, how do you kind of still have that people connection in an environment that's so driven, by AI. And I think that's the part I don't feel like anyone's solved. And I don't even know that, from what I've read, that there's a whole lot of discussion about it. The discussion is about the productivity tools and the expansion of markets and but how do we keep the human factor in leading? Because at the end of the day, the best leaders are the ones with the most humanity, in my opinion, and really can recognize what the impact is on the decisions that they're making.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know as a leader, it sounds like you've continued to grow and develop and taken additional classes and any books that you would put on a leader's reading list that you think would be helpful?
There's so many wonderful books, and I love to read. But I think two that have stand out that I seem to go back to time and time again is one, which is Switch by Dan and Chip Heath. And that book really talks about the whole concept of how do you kind of execute? How do you take something, an operational plan, and execute it by leveraging the different elements of how we as human beings think? So that one is just fabulous on getting things done. And then the second one is, I don't remember the author, but it's What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Okay. Marshall Goldsmith, maybe. But it's just such a great book to remind you that, at every level that you go on, and there's so many more pearls than this, but at every level that you advance in your career, don't just count on what got you to that position. And kind of like I talked about earlier, but think about what skills do you need to continue to develop in the next position and then the next position, because otherwise you're kind of climbing this linear ladder as opposed to kind of going around the jungle gym, so to speak, and developing all these skills to get you kind of across.
So any favorite quotes that you like to refer to?
Yeah, so I'm kind of notorious for cliche and silly quotes, but my grandfather, who was an amazing man, had three things that we kind of always talked about, and you could use these three quotes interchangeably to make almost any decision. And he would say, number one was, there, but for the grace of God, go I. So when you were struggling or whatever, remember that. Number two, only judge yourself only by yourself. So only judge yourself against yourself. And then the third one, take the high road. And so it's like they seem silly, but if you apply those to pretty much any given situation, you can kind of jump down and go, okay, I don't need to win this. What's the high road? The high road is what's best for the business. Only judge yourself against yourself. It's not about me. Like we're not going to have this. And then obviously I have a lot of faith. So there, for the grace of God, go I. You just always feel blessed with all the opportunities you have.
Yeah, that's good. What do you do outside of work to recharge?
Not enough. Really spend time with family. I have an amazing family. I have two adult children. One is a music singer-songwriter, and so we love to listen to his music. And then my daughter is a accounting CFO, and she's just an amazing person, getting ready to have our first grandchild. So, and then of course I have an amazing husband. So really family stuff, getting together as family, kind of doing walks, just hanging around.
Any parting advice for a new or up and coming leader?
I would say, think about it. And when I say that, I mean, leadership is not just, I think so many people think, oh, I'm a natural born leader. And they just kind of dive into it. I would say, think about it. You're given an amazing gift to lead people, and they trust you, and they're watching you, and they watch your movements, and they watch your, listen to your comments. And I think that we don't put enough emphasis on, think about it. How can I be an effective leader? Is this working? Is this environment, am I creating the right environment for people to be successful? So I would just say, take your time, think about it, understand your impact, and be ready to pivot if it's not working.
Well, thanks so much, Lori. Appreciate you again taking time out of your schedule. I know what you've had some great thoughts to share, and wish you continued success in all you're doing.
No, thank you. It was such a pleasure, and it was so great to meet you.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.